So My Hero Academia Chapter 381 is finally out, and with it we not only get to see just how the Shiketsu High students influenced the tidings of the battle at Gunga, but we also get to see the first hero ever to invoke an emotion in All For One that he's never felt before. Fear. And so, without further ado, let's jump right into My Hero Academia Chapter 381, titled Darkness. This chapter opens up exactly where the last chapter left off, with Keimi, Shishikura, Inasa, and the other Shiketsu High students arriving on the battlefield to face off against All For One and his army of villains. Upon arriving to fight, Keimi is confused by the fact that All For One has a face now, and I mean, as weird as that sentence is, it makes sense. But more notably, Shishikura, aka Meatball, announces to All For One that he will avenge his father, who was a jailer that was killed during All For One's mass prison break attack on Tartarus. And interestingly, Shishikura notes how he initially came here with the intent to kill All For One, but now has decided to not give in to hate and instead to inherit his father's will and efforts as a jailer. It's such a small tidbit of information to add, but I feel like it adds so much to Shishikura's story and motivation. But anyways, with Shiketsu High now in the fight, the battle at Gunga starts to turn to the hero's favor. So much so that Pixie Bob of the Wild Wild Pussycats declares the hero's new priority, other than trying to survive, is to focus on immobilizing Toga and defeating All For One, as she commands all heroes with long-range quirks to fire away at the King of Villainy. And they do, unleashing a massive barrage of attacks on the villain. Hawk's delighted about Shiketsu's arrival because 1, he was saved from being brutally murdered, and 2, the heroes are winning again, contacts Tsukauchi and thanks him for sending in reinforcements. But to his surprise, Tsukauchi lets the Birdman know that the students made their way there by themselves, before he could even get in contact. And Tsukauchi once again reiterates that the fate of the My Hero world rests in the heroes' hands, so they need to stop All For One as soon as possible. But speaking of All For One, the Mad Tyrant, amid dodging all of the incoming attacks, mentions how he knew the heroes were initially cautious of him stealing quirks, as they only sent Endeavor and Hawks to fight him. But now they're throwing everything and everyone they have at him, so it must mean they've become desperate. And with this realization, All For One laughs in pure evil and activates multiple quirks, causing him to grow wing-like appendages from his back with orbs of light at their tips as he shoots out a massive blast of energy from his hands, accompanied by what looks to be black lightning. Unfortunately for the heroes, this attack proves to be quite effective, with it injuring multiple heroes such as Kamui Woods and Kinoko Komori, while also pushing the heroes with defensive and shield-based quirks to their very limits. Although, as the hero Shishido lets us know, this attack isn't entirely a bad thing, as now they have finally got All For One to stop and fight instead of running. And I mean, sure, the villain who is equivalent to a nuke in power isn't running, but what the hell are you gonna do against a nuke? I mean, All For One himself even asks this, questioning why the heroes think they have any chance of beating him without the help of the only man who could match him. All For One then goes on to explain that everyone here was born during All Might's reign and time of peace, so none of them know what it was like to live in the dark times. None of them know how truly feared and powerful he was and now is. Now, as All For One says all of this, there are a few things to note. Firstly, when mentioning the dark times, we are greeted to this flashback image of One For All's 5th user, Daijiro Banjo, aka the original wielder of Black Whip, standing amongst the rubble of a devastated city, emphasizing the darkness of All For One's era. We also see that in the present, Endeavor is actually flying away from the battle, luring a super crispy Dabi away from the other heroes and the fight. But most importantly, with All For One's spiel about the past and All Might, I think that this could be foreshadowing to All Might's return as a hero. Now, as crazy as that sounds, it's more possible than you would think. All For One's drug to revert himself back to his prime came from Aries' quirk, someone the heroes have access to, and has shown great improvement in her power since the last time we saw her a good few months ago in My Hero time. What's to say the heroes didn't develop their own version of this drug for All Might to use as a truly last resort in case the villains did prove to be too much for the heroes. I mean, last we saw him, All Might did just leave Tsukauchi with a mysterious briefcase. Who knows, maybe he will take a drug similar to All for One and regain his prime power at the cost of his life to fight the villain one last time. All Might would go out as he lived, a hero. But anyways, ingenious theories aside, following All for One's rant about the past, Inasa blasts All for One with a powerful gust of wind, and he shouts, in typical Inasa fashion, how they know all about the past thanks to their mandatory modern history class. Classic Inasa, taking everything literally. But more importantly, he mentions how he made the decision to support Shoto and Endeavor, and so, to help his comrades, he will not give in to any form of fear. All for One, impressed by Inasa's quirk, initially thinks about stealing it, and he actually uses the wind currents Inasa produced to his favor, using them to propel his attacks to hit multiple heroes, including Inasa himself, who gets struck across the face. Despite this, the heroes don't falter, as all who are hit by these attacks tell Inasa to continue his attack, and Inasa, now bloody in face and pissed, lets All for One know that the windier the day, the stronger his quirk becomes. Instead of fearing the past, he wants to see the future. Hawks, in seeing Inasa fight, thinks about how One for All isn't the only power that connects people's hearts. It's clear Endeavor is also bringing hope to the new generation. All for One, disgusted by the new light of hope in Hawks' eyes, attempts once again to wound the hero's morale, mocking the heroes, claiming that all their attempts to stop him are still futile, as not a single hero can get close to him because they will risk him stealing their quirk. It is then that karma strikes hard and strong, as an absolutely massive dark entity with two bright glowing eyes appears right behind All for One. And as All for One's expression changes from his typical cocky nature to what can only be assumed is fear, the gigantic dark entity is revealed to be none other than Tokoyami and Dark Shadow. All for One, remembering how Tokoyami's full power attack is the move that destroyed his mask, regains the same feeling he had back then. He needs to dodge this attack right now. Damn! Tokoyami is the only man to put the fear of God in the king of villainy. And of course, Tokoyami, being the edgelord he is, demands that All for One stop bragging about knowing darkness, because he has never encountered darkness like this. Alright, Tokoyami, top tier character, he's up there with the greats. The greats! Tokoyami then goes on to explain that Dark Shadow can maintain this massive form now thanks to Pixie Bob, who made him an earth shelter for him to build up his power, as well as the newly formed rain clouds blocking out the sun and putting out Dobby's fires. In addition to this, Tokoyami also states how the shadow All for One produced on the world has long since been illuminated by Class 1A, as we not only see a flashback to the civilians welcoming Midori and the others back into UA, but also this absolutely adorable image of baby Tokoyami lying in bed beside a baby Dark Shadow. Oh, I mean, come on, look at them, they're adorable, it's a cuteness overload. Tokoyami, then preparing to unleash his power on All for One, thinks about how All Might said All for One wouldn't be able to steal Endeavor's quirk just by touching his flames. So, Tokoyami determined that it must be the same way with Dark Shadow. Basically meaning that as long as All for One doesn't touch Tokoyami himself, he won't lose Dark Shadow. Hawks, in seeing his disciple Tokoyami go above and beyond, thinks about how if he has helped Tokoyami on his journey even just a little bit, then he would be very grateful for being born with his, and I quote, dirty wings. As we see the image of Hawks pushing Tokoyami forward, full-on father-son Kamehameha style. Tokoyami then finally, with the help of Inasa's wind, lets out a devastating attack, connecting perfectly with All for One, called Black Abyss Balder. And that's it for chapter 381. Let me know what you thought of this chapter. If you liked this video, don't forget to leave a like. For more My Hero content, subscribe to the Lunchtime crew. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Plus Ultra.